In 21 days, I was in Kailash, trekked. My muscle mass had gone down, my legs had become like this. Always I've been walking, trekking, playing games.
There is a mountain in the far west of Tibet that no human being is allowed to touch. Everyone who ever tried to reach its peak came back broken, came back terrified, or never came back at all. Now an old warning has crawled into the light again, and it claims that something was buried under that mountain long before the first human being ever drew breath. What people are saying about it should frighten you far more than you expect. The warning that broke 60 years of silence. For 5 years, the gates to this sacred region stayed sealed, and no pilgrim from India was allowed to walk the ancient circle around Mount Kailash. Then, in the summer of 2025, after quiet negotiations between India and China, the route finally reopened, and the first pilgrims in half a decade crossed back into Tibet. The world expected a quiet return of faith, yet what arrived instead was a warning. Around that same time, word began to spread that a monk of 94 years, silent for 6 full decades, had finally decided to speak. For most of his life, he had guarded a set of forbidden texts hidden beneath his monastery, writings never meant for ordinary eyes. And according to the account, these texts described Mount Kailash in a way that no travel guide ever would. The mountain, the texts claimed, was never simply a mountain at all. It was an ancient machine, placed upon the earth by some power that existed long before the first human ever walked the planet. The texts called it an anchor point, a single fixed place on the surface of the world where time itself does not move the way it should. Around this point, they said, time bends. The human body begins to fail in strange ways, and machines quietly stop working. And beneath the peak, sealed away in darkness, lies something the writings named the seed of the next world. For as long as anyone can remember, the people living in this mountain's shadow have treated it with a fear outsiders never understood. They never called the sacred walk around it a simple act of devotion, but spoke of it as stepping into a field of raw and living energy, a place where a person could lose far more than their sins. Some who went too close, the old ones warned, surrendered their hours, their years, and even their future, and none of it was ever handed back. That single claim has pulled millions of curious eyes back toward this forbidden peak. And the deeper you follow what has truly happened on that mountain, the harder it becomes to laugh the warning away. Because the first thing you learn about Kailash is that no living human being has ever been permitted to stand upon its summit, and every soul who tried was turned back in the same haunting way. The peak that turns away every human being. Every other great mountain on Earth has surrendered to human feet. Everest has been climbed thousands of times. K2 has been conquered despite its killer reputation. And even the cruelest walls of the Himalaya carry footprints now. Mount Kailash, standing at just over 21,000 feet, is far lower and gentler than those giants. And yet not a single confirmed human being has ever stood upon its summit. The strangeness runs deeper than an empty peak, because Kailash is not even a hard climb by the brutal standards of real mountaineering. Something else has always stopped people cold. Travel back to 1926, when a British officer named Hugh Rutledge circled the mountain and walked away calling it utterly unclimbable, while the companion who found one possible route was driven back by savage snow that fell from a clear sky. 10 years later, an Austrian explorer named Herbert Tichy arrived and asked the local people whether the peak could be climbed. The answer has followed travelers ever since, because he was told that only a man completely free of sin could ever climb Kailash. And such a man would not even need to, since he could simply turn into a bird and fly to the top. The strangest turn came from the greatest climber who ever lived. In the 1980s, Reinhold Messner, The first man to conquer all 14 of the highest peaks on Earth was handed official permission to climb Kailash, and he refused it outright. He explained that conquering this mountain would mean conquering something inside the souls of millions, and told anyone desperate to plant a flag to go find a harder mountain elsewhere. Then came 2001, when a Spanish team secured permission from the Chinese authorities and prepared to make history. What stopped them was not weather and not stone. It was a wave of pure human fury. Pilgrims and monks and millions of believers rose up in protest. The Dalai Lama joined them, and the climb collapsed before it began, while the mountain was sealed away for good. Every attempt ends the same way, with hardened men who have faced death on far deadlier peaks, suddenly turning around and walking home. And for one group of climbers, the ones who ignored every warning and pushed too high, turning back would prove to be the very least of the horrors waiting for them. The 12 hours that stole 20 years. Some stories cling to a place and refuse to let go, and none clings to Kailash tighter than this one. It centers on a group of climbers from Siberia, hardened men who knew cold and altitude the way most people know their own street, who ventured onto the higher slopes and stayed there for only 12 hours. Those 12 hours amount to barely half a day. And yet, when the men came back down, the people waiting could not recognize the faces they knew. The climbers looked as though 20 years had been ripped from their bodies in an afternoon. Their skin hung loose and gray. Deep lines had cut into cheeks that had been smooth that morning, and the thick, dark hair they had carried up the slope had turned a brittle, ghostly white. The medical reports only deepened the dread. Their bodies showed the kind of stress that belongs to men in their 70s and 80s, though every one of them had climbed up young and strong, and their organs behaved as though they had been running for decades too long. One account described the eyes of the survivors as the most disturbing detail of all, because there was no fear left inside them, only a strange emptiness, as if they had seen something that quietly erased a part of who they were. The horror did not end when they reached safety far below. Over the following 2 years, one by one, every member of that group died. Some hearts simply stopped without warning, while in others the organs shut down for reasons no doctor could name. Whatever those men walked into during their 12 hours upon the slope followed them all the way home, and did not leave until each of them was gone. Stories like this are why the mountain carries such a fearsome reputation, yet even the most chilling story is only the surface of a thing. Long after these climbers were buried, a serious man with a serious team traveled to Kailash to hunt for a real explanation, and what he claimed to uncover was stranger than any ghost story ever whispered on those slopes. The Doctor Who found a city beneath the ice. In 1999, a Russian eye surgeon named Ernst Muldashev did what almost no one else had the nerve to attempt. He assembled a full team of geologists, physicists, and historians, and he camped in the long shadow of Kailash for months, examining the mountain the way an investigator studies an unsolved crime. This part is not a rumor whispered around a fire, because the expedition truly happened, and the conclusions the doctor carried home have kept people arguing ever since. Muldashev returned and told the world that Kailash is not a natural mountain at all. He described it as a gigantic pyramid, shaped by intelligence far beyond our understanding, standing at the heart of a vast hidden complex. Around it, he claimed, sat more than 100 smaller pyramids and enormous flat faces of stone he called mirrors. These stone mirrors, he believed, could bend time and space around them, and that bending was the true reason people felt so wrong and so disturbed near the peak. Then, he offered the detail that still crawls beneath the skin of everyone who hears it. When his team finally mapped the full layout of what he called the City of the Gods, plotting every pyramid and every mirror in its exact position, The shape that emerged on the page looked to him like the twisting spiral of a strand of human DNA. His people also reported hearing deep, unexplained sounds while they worked. A low breathing or humming that seemed to rise from somewhere inside the body of the mountain. The doctor pushed his theory even further. He spoke of hidden chambers within the great structure, and of beings said in the oldest legends to rest in a frozen sleep deep inside, waiting through the ages for a time that had not yet come. To Moldashev, Kailash was never merely a place. It was a machine, a monument, and a doorway, standing exactly where the ancient texts had always placed the center of the world. You do not have to accept a word of it to feel the weight of the question the doctor was chasing. Moldashev did not invent the idea that this mountain is the axis of the earth. He simply arrived thousands of years too late, walking in the footsteps of 4 separate religions that had already named this one peak the center of all creation. And the strange land spread around it holds a secret that makes their ancient certainty very hard to dismiss. The living lake and the lake of the dead. At the foot of Mount Kailash rest 2 lakes lying almost shoulder to shoulder, so close a person could nearly step from one shore to the other, and no 2 bodies of water on earth could be more opposite if a hand had designed them to be enemies. The first is Lake Manasaravar, its water fresh and clear and sweet, shaped into a nearly perfect circle. It sits among the highest freshwater lakes on the planet, and for thousands of years pilgrims have called it the lake born inside the mind of a god. Even when the cruel Tibetan cold freezes everything around it into stone, the surface of Manasaravar often stays calm and mirror still, holding the whole sky inside it. Right beside it lies the second lake, Rakshastal, the living opposite of its gentle neighbor. Its water is salt and bitter and empty of life, so no fish swim within it, and almost nothing grows along its edges. It curves into a dark crescent moon, its surface forever restless, never once settling into peace. The oldest stories bind this lake to a demon king who sat upon its shore in fearsome devotion, offering his own heads to the god who ruled the mountain above. One lake gives life, while the other holds only death, and the 2 sit side by side beneath the same sacred peak, divided by nothing more than a thin strip of land. A narrow channel connects them, and it carries water from the living lake to the dead one, only in certain years, almost as though Manasaravar decides for itself when the barren waters beside it deserve to be fed. Yet the twin lakes are only the beginning of the wonder. From the region cradling this single mountain, 4 of the greatest rivers in all of Asia are born: the Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Sutlej, and the Karnali, which pours into the sacred Ganges. All begin their long lives here before rushing toward the 4 corners of the world. The ancient traditions taught that each river flows from the mouth of a different sacred animal: a lion, a horse, an elephant, and a peacock, each set to guard a side of the earth. Strip the legend away and the fact beneath it is just as staggering, because the water keeping well over 1 billion people alive across many nations traces straight back to the ground beneath this one forbidden peak. And once you see the mountain that gives birth to all of it, you begin to understand why its very shape has unsettled every eye that ever studied it. The shape that maps the whole earth. Stand before Kailash, and the first thing that grips you is how deliberate the whole mountain looks. Most peaks are pure chaos, all broken ridges and jagged teeth thrown up by violence within the earth. And Kailash refuses to behave that way. It rises upon 4 steep faces that line up roughly with north and south and east and west. Its sides so even and so measured that the earliest explorers wrote that it seemed to have been raised by giant hands out of huge blocks of stone. Down its southern face runs a long vertical cut, and across it lie flat horizontal layers of rock, and together When the light falls at the right angle, they form the shape of an immense staircase climbing toward the heavens. Some see a sacred symbol carved into the stone, while others see a stairway built for gods. Whatever the eye chooses to call it, no one who stands before that face walks away feeling they have simply looked at an ordinary mountain. Then the mystery stretches across the entire planet. Certain researchers claim that if you draw straight lines outward from Kailash, across the curve of the earth, the mountain links itself to the most haunting ancient wonders humanity ever raised. They trace those lines to the great pyramids of Egypt, the standing stones of Stonehenge, the silent statues of Easter Island, the temples of Angkor Wat, and the hidden city of Petra, carved into rose-colored rock. According to those who mapped these connections, all of these places rest upon a hidden web of energy that circles the globe, and Kailash sits at the very center of it, like the still point at the heart of a spinning wheel. They insist that the odds of so many sacred sites falling into one line by accident are smaller than 1 in many millions, far too small for coincidence to explain. And all of it circles back to a single belief that has survived every empire and every age: that the true secret of this mountain is not written on its slopes at all, but sealed in the darkness beneath them. What lies sealed beneath the mountain? For thousands of years, 4 of the world's great religions have stared at this one peak and refused, absolutely refused, to let it go. To Hindus, Kailash is the eternal home of Lord Shiva, seated in endless meditation at the roof of the world. And to complete a single circle of its base is believed to wash away the sins of a lifetime. To Tibetan Buddhists, it is the throne of a mighty deity, and their greatest legend tells of the master Milarepa racing a rival to the summit and winning the mountain on the first ray of the rising sun. To followers of the Jain faith, this is the sacred ground where their very first teacher broke free of the endless cycle of birth and death forever. And to the ancient Bon tradition, older in Tibet than all the rest, this is the 9-story Spirit Mountain, the living seat of the sky. 4 faiths born in 4 different worlds, agreeing on almost nothing else, all pointed at the same lonely peak and called it the doorway to something beyond this life. Beneath all of that agreement runs the oldest whisper of them all, the belief that something lies sealed inside the mountain. Some speak of a hidden hall that holds the true story of where humanity came from, a story that has nothing to do with the one taught in any school. Others speak of a waiting seed, resting quietly for a world that has not yet been born. It is exactly this belief that the forbidden texts of that silent monk were said to describe, and exactly this secret that so many have warned no living person was ever meant to reach. Now here is where honesty matters, because you have followed me this far and deserve the truth beside the wonder. No monastery has ever produced records of that 94-year-old monk, and no scientist has ever found a chamber or a machine beneath the peak. The tale of the climbers who aged 20 years traces back to a single unverified account, and the doctor's buried city remains a theory mainstream science has never accepted. And yet, strip away every invented detail, and what remains is somehow more disturbing than the legends ever were. A real mountain, forbidden to human feet, giving birth to the rivers that feed half of Asia, worshipped as the center of creation by billions across 4 separate faiths, still stands untouched in a world where we have conquered nearly everything else. We walked upon the moon and mapped the floor of the ocean, and yet this one silent peak told our entire species to stay away. And against all reason, we obeyed. So tell me honestly down in the comments, do you believe there is something hidden beneath this mountain that we were never meant to find? Or do you think the deepest mystery is simply How much of our own world still refuses to be explained?